Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be discussing how to meet the new regulations adopted by the SEC this year. My name is Cindy Haight. I'm going to be hosting for you today. I work for SGS as an inside sales representative for industrial division as well as medical devices. I also work for SGS Academy, which is our training academy. I've been with the company actually encroaching on my second year. I do have 20 years of experience in the certification industry, and it's my pleasure to be here and to host this great session for you today. I would like to introduce our amazing faculty and speakers that we have for you today. Today we have Mr. Willie Fabritas. Willie is the Global Head of Strategy and Business Development for Information Security here at SGS. Willie has a master's degree in computer science and for more than 25 years has held management positions with organizations in the private sector. His experience with management systems goes way back to 1994. That's even before me, Willie, where he implemented an ISO 9002 1994 QMS within 12 months for a stamping facility in Germany. He is a qualified lead auditor for a variety of standards, including ISO 9001, ISO 27001, CSA STAR, 27701, and 22301. He's audited multiple Fortune 100 organizations to these standards. Willie's worked for several global certification bodies and has delivered thousands of audits in Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Willie was the global head for information security, privacy, and business continuity for another certification body before joining SGS as our global head for strategy and business development. We also have Chris Cronin with us today. Chris is a partner at Haylock Security Labs, which is a US-based risk management and cybersecurity consulting firm. He and his team help organizations manage their information security risks, and they work with US regulators and attorneys as expert witnesses in data breach cases. And Chris is fluent in technology, regulations, management, audit, and the law, and his expertise is wide-ranging and help organizations understand how well-designed information and cybersecurity programs align to business interests and legal expectations as well. Chris developed duty of care risk analysis, or DoCRA, and CIS RAM to help management, cybersecurity experts, and attorneys work toward the common goal of reasonable security. US-based regulators have been using DoCRA as a test for reasonable security when it's applied to ISO 27001, the NIST risk management framework, CIS controls, PCI DSS, and other frameworks to secure important information assets. Here's just a little brief synopsis about SGS. We are a global company. We're the #1 leader in the testing, inspection, and certification industries. We have over 98,000 employees, 2,650 offices, and we have 7 primary focus areas in our business. Here are some of the Willie and I, we work for the Knowledge Solutions division here at SGS. And you can see, of course, we offer certification services. We also offer competency training and professional development training through SGS Academy. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the session today. We also have the capability to offer customized audits as well as technical consulting. And our difference is we take our global and our local experts, and we have partners within the industries and regulatory associations. We take that with our global widespread network of professionals to deliver a quality of service as your end-to-end business partner. Thank you again for being here today. We have a great session. I do want to remind you, we have a Q&A area. If you have questions that come to mind, please post your questions there and we'll reply to them either throughout the programming or toward the end of the session today. You will receive a copy of these slides in PDF format. You'll receive an email with the slides and a link to view the session on demand at your leisure. Thanks again for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Willie.
Yeah, Cindy, thank you very, very much for the intro. Much appreciated. And I noticed, and that's my bad, that I should update my bio, because I forgot to mention that I'm also sitting on SC27 and SC42, which are the ISO committees responsible for writing standards like the ISO 27001, guess what, SC27, as well as SC42, which is responsible for writing standards related to AI. And fresh out of the press from yesterday, I can share with you and the audience that the FDIS, the final draft international standard 42001, has been released. I don't know whether it's published, but it's available to committee members. And ISO 42001 is about management system for AI. And I know this is not exactly the subject of today's presentation, but I also wanted to take the opportunity to share this news with the audience because we all talk about AI. I think there is not a single day where I'm not hearing AI at least 28 times per hour or so. So there is definitely a lot of interest in this technology. Whether this is just a buzz or whether this is ongoing and will be lasting, that's a totally different story. But I'm very confident that there will be a huge need for having a strong structure, a strong governance process for AI. That said, today we have a very simple agenda. And I would just like to share with you, we would like to talk about the SEC cybersecurity risk management rules and how those rules are aligned to or not to 27001, or whether they are indeed 27001 in disguise. And then Chris will talk about the duty of care risk analysis and how this brings the things together. And then finally, we will have a Q&A. But for today's session, Chris is really the expert. So I would like to hand it over to my good friend, Chris, who apparently is just 10 miles away from me, but it didn't work out to have this webinar at a bar.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I would like to spend time. Willie and I have done some good work together, and anytime we've had clients work with Willie, there have been just such great stories to illustrate why we do things that are not instinctive. And once we adopt the method, all of a sudden a light goes off. So he's got a lot of those light goes off stories that help illustrate how people can actually do work that looks intimidating at first, but then all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is more natural once I just change a habit here or there. So anyway, we'd love to have those sessions with you and do them in person next time. So what I'd like to do is just jump into this description of what we mean by the SEC risk management strategy, governance, incident disclosure rules. So the Securities and Exchange Commission just has responsibility over registered companies and other sorts of financial organizations. And what it does is it operates under two specific laws and then it writes specific rules about how it oversees them. The specific risk management rule that came out in July of this year went through a couple cycles of public commentary. What that means is the regulators say, hey, cybersecurity really means a lot to investors. If someone has a breach, if someone has a failure in their cybersecurity program, that creates a real problem for investors, certainly to customers, but to investors, which is what the SEC is really concerned about. We need to actually make sure that companies are being really clear to their investors about how they do cybersecurity risk management, because it is such a big issue. So they came up with some draft rules, sent them out to the public for public commentary. Anybody is allowed, whether you're an organization, a lobbyist, an attorney, a practitioner, you can send your comments in and say, this is who I'm with, this is what my interest is, here's what I recommend for your final rule. So they went through 2 cycles of that. What the rules require companies to do is to disclose your cybersecurity incidents that would be material to an investor's decision, whether, how to vote on a certain investor decision, or whether or not to invest or divest. What that means is, let's say you're a company or a public company and you say, I'm about to buy a whole new division. It's going to be expensive, but in the near term, within 5 years, we should really own this part of the marketplace. You tell that to an investor so they can make a risk-based decision about whether to buy or sell. They may say, that sounds risky to me. I'm going to divest and I'll put my money somewhere else I feel good about. Some might say, that's the exact thing I would do. I'm going to invest. We have to do the same thing with cybersecurity now. The rules do not tell us what risk management activities we have to do. It tells us that we have to tell the street, we have to tell the investors how we do what we do. So the way we're describing this to our clients when we're talking to them, just one-on-one, hey, you know what the SEC is really doing? Easiest way to put it, they're calling your bluff. You've been saying publicly, hey, we care about cybersecurity, we apply best practices. They're saying, okay, tell the investors how. We're not telling you what to do. We're telling you that you have to describe how you do it so they can make an informed decision as an investor. So this is the concept of being transparent. They use a phrase called reasonable investor. We're going to point to that in a moment. This becomes a really interesting linchpin. But the reasonable investor is who you have to be informing. So if someone's just doing some goofy stuff and they're irrational, we're not trying to make sure that every possible investor can make an educated decision. We're not responsible for that. What's also important to understand about this is that this is not a data breach regulation. A data breach can create an impact. This could be anything. It could be downtime. It could be poor integrity of a system. It could be a system being taken over by someone else. It could be super productive doing what you're doing, but cause harm doing other things. It's any kind of incident that would cause a reasonable investor to say, I would invest, I would divest. I would vote this way, I would vote the other way. We have to give them the right information. This is a really, really interesting quote. This is one of the most, and Willie, this will go back to a lot of conversations we've had about near-term and long-term thinking. So this is something the SEC said in their final rule. They said, to the extent investors view strong cybersecurity risk management strategy and governance favorably, registrants disclosing more robust processes more clearly could benefit from greater interest from investors, leading to higher market liquidity relative to companies that do not. They're saying that we're betting, as the SEC, that investors are going to feel much better about an organization that's transparent and specific than one that obfuscates, one that cannot be clear. That's fascinating because cybersecurity is not a quarterly benefit kind of activity, right? The risk management is a long range kind of activity. You're thinking ahead, you're planning ahead, you're investing ahead. So the SEC is doing this really interesting thing that steps into long-term thinking rather than quarterly thinking. Yes,
so
jump right in.
So it really says, if you are open and transparent, you create trust. If you are open and transparent, you are more reliable because you are trustworthy. If you are open and transparent, you are not hiding something.
Yeah.
So it's all about risk transparency, right? It's all about making sure that everyone is equally informed about risk as in uncertainty. And that obviously is very important for investors as well as other stakeholders of a company, whether this is clients, customers, employees, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm going to bring you around to something that I learned within my first day of talking to Willie many years ago. And it's what inspired this thing that we just talked about earlier. Cindy mentioned DoCRA, duty of care risk analysis. It came from this one specific conversation I had with you, Willie. We'll walk everyone through it, but it gets to this point because we found that our clients who are using this method already very easily adopt these new SEC rules. They go, oh, we're just describing what we do. That's all you're doing. And for those who haven't really had these conversations with Willie or the benefit that's come from them, they're still saying, can we actually just kind of fudge this until we figure it out? And they're lost, right? But you'll see how this works. It's really terrific. So what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the basic clauses. We'll go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to give you the exact quote so that the clause title, you can read that yourselves. I'm just going to quickly get through this so we can get back to our conversation. The market sees when it reads each of these clauses something. They're interpreting something. The first, they're interpreting, please tell investors in a way they will understand how you manage the cybersecurity risks that may harm them. This is a phrase that's going to come up a few times today, that may harm them. So we're not trying to say, oh, there's a cybersecurity risk, we might get hacked. If you look at a 10K now, these are the public filings that people state. This is what we're doing strategically, financially. These are the people in charge. And in every 10K filing, there's also 1A where you describe your risks. And in that, people, if you look at most, information technology or information security risks now, you see they're very template. We are an international company, and all sorts of people like to hack, and hackers might hack us, and that could lead to disruptions in business. Very, very template. But now we're saying something very different. Please tell investors in a way they will understand how you manage the cybersecurity risks that may hurt them. All right. So this comes up. This is a question of materiality that you'll see come up. Then the market sees in this next clause, please tell investors in the way they will understand how you make cybersecurity risk as important as the other risks you manage. This is fantastic. So I was at a company yesterday, a large international company. You all know their name; they're a household name, and we're having this conversation about cybersecurity risk management. And I said, you've got engineers who know quality management better than just about anybody in the whole wide world. They know the ISO 9000 standard. They operate to a number of ISO standards. And what they know is quality management. They know how to engineer their process so that it ensures a quality outcome. We're telling you to do the same thing for cybersecurity, where the quality is you're ensuring your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But have your engineers, your quality engineers, work with your cybersecurity team to have them show them how this is done, so that the ISO program becomes more based on metrics and continuous improvement. Sounds familiar, right, Willie?
Well, I'm smiling, I'm laughing, because I was actually at a conference this week in Orlando, and there was one person saying, now I'm going to tell you something most likely very controversial. So I'm, okay, what is she going to tell me? And she says, well, as I said, I need to warn you, it might be controversial, but the CISO is not responsible for cybersecurity. It's the business that is responsible for cybersecurity. That sounds like deja vu. That sounds exactly like 30 years ago, where companies said the quality manager is responsible for the quality of our shit we produce. For the products we produce. And it's something like, no, it's not the quality manager who is responsible for bad products. It's everyone who is somehow involved, from purchasing to engineering to manufacturing to shipping, whatever caused the issue. The quality function might be responsible for the program, but not for the bad product. Now, translate that to information security. The CISO is responsible for the program, but that person is by no means responsible for any breaches. That could be whatever cause was. And let's face it, the majority of issues relates back to human behavior, whether this is weak passwords not being changed, whether this is incorrect firewall configuration, whether this is bad maintenance of a generator, whatever. It's all coming down to the human element, and that is part of the responsibility of the business, not the CISO.
And the resources that are allocated to the CISO and her or his team, the priority given, the requirement that other organizations outside of technology collaborate with the CISO and her or his staff, all comes from that executive level, right? a CISO can be highly capable, highly skilled, highly experienced, have an expert team, have the best tools in the whole wide world. And cybersecurity risks change, and the organization needs to say, hey, look, we wanted to do this opening of this operation in Asia, and we realize that as we do that, there are risks that we have not addressed. We need to make sure that the risk management is a part of this, and that might be risk having to do with geopolitics, supply chain, a cost of raw materials, and cybersecurity. And that's what this is saying. Make sure that cybersecurity, because it does create such a risk, is integrated with every other thing that you're doing inside the organization for risk. It's beautiful. It's manna from heaven. But we want to be sure that people understand that. Okay, and then next, please tell investors what expertise you rely on. So this is nice and easy. If you have experts, whether they're consultants or experts on your team or whatever you use experts for, explain to people that you've got the best minds on the project. That's what that is. You can say, we're just using our homegrown team and we think they're good enough and they're great. Or you can say, we use our inside team for just about everything, but for this one specialized area, we count on this one expert team. That's fine. You're just going to tell the marketplace what you do. Then please tell investors whether you consider third parties who pose risks to you as a risk to your investors. This is a beautiful thing. When we work with our clients and we're working on third-party risk analysis, we tell them, you're never going to control the risks at your vendors. You may detect that there are better risks going with other vendors and you go with them. You may be able to give your vendors a map toward the behavior that you want them to do if you're influential enough. But for the most part, managing a third-party risk is to be measured against the risk you can tolerate, and what the SEC is saying, and the risk that your investors can tolerate. So now when you're saying, I accept the risk of this third party doing things right, even though I don't have the ability to audit them, or their audit keeps coming up bad and they haven't been able to change, you can't just say that I'm accepting the risk on my own behalf anymore. You're saying, I'm accepting that risk on behalf of investors. That's what the SEC is saying. And by the way, the Federal Trade Commission is saying, and consumers. You're taking that risk on behalf of consumers. So you need to now find a way to say, is my third-party risk management program appropriate for the risk to investors, according to this rule? We can go into more depth on that. That's a whole separate topic about how to handle that risk. What I'm saying up front is, don't ever imagine that you can master another company's risks. You can't. It's a matter of figuring out what risk you can expose yourself to based on what they're doing. Next, please tell investors about how any current or previous incidents should inform their voting and investment decisions. So you could say, we just had a breach last week, and we're filing a special kind of filing called an 8K, which means that I'm showing you a new condition that's come about since my previous 10K, and it shouldn't wait for my next 10K. I'm going to file an 8K to inform you about a change. The change is that we had a breach, or the change is that we lost a functionality in a plant, and we think it's going to hurt our meeting our targets for sales, and that will have an impact on our quarterly earnings. We don't see it lasting past a quarter, because that plant is back up and it's running, and we've cleaned up the problem. Or we had an incident 2 years ago that required us to find a different supplier because the current supplier couldn't, or a different way to engineer product because we couldn't rely on the security of the suppliers. We had to find a different material that we could use, and it's taken us 2 years to recover from that vulnerability. So even if something is old and you're still recuperating from it, you inform your investors. All right. Next, please tell investors whether management who are responsible for running the company are involved in cybersecurity risks that pose a risk of harm to investors. Now they're getting into the roles and responsibilities. So we want to know not just that someone, hey, CISO had that responsibility, but to what degree are managers actually involved? The shortcut to this is, if you're ever sitting in front of Congress explaining the breach and you say, oh, we had this one employee who didn't follow the rule, and that's why we had this breach, you're not talking about governance correctly at all. You're not talking about roles and responsibilities at all. You're saying, I don't understand that a method, a process, a culture is responsible for cybersecurity, not a person who may or may not make a mistake. To the point Willie just made, people make mistakes. The point is, do you have a good process to reduce the likelihood or the impact of those mistakes? And are you able to recover from those mistakes and then learn from them and improve from them? Or do automation that requires less human interactivity so that they have fewer opportunities to make those mistakes? So you don't want to be in a position where you're pointing the finger at someone. The point is, management has responsibilities. Then this is interesting. Tell investors which management executive or director position they're involved in cybersecurity risk and what their expertise is. So it's not just tell us management's involved, but who, and tell us how they're capable. Now imagine this: you're an analyst, right? You're an analyst for public companies in the manufacturing sector. You know manufacturing. You know this kind of manufacturing. You know this area of the marketplace. And all of a sudden, there's this new body of knowledge that comes out in everyone's 10K about cybersecurity. You're going to read a lot of these cybersecurity risks in 1A, and you're going to say, I can't really tell whether that's a good risk disclosure or not, because I don't know cybersecurity risk management. I know manufacturing in this segment. That's why I'm an analyst. You're going to have two options. One is to read something that reads like it's being very honest and very detailed and very open, to the point that Willie's making, to say, no one would say that unless they could show it. My next questions that I'm going to ask during an earnings call is, tell me about that. But if you're able to say, look, I've got a CISO who's done the following things in her career, and she's super capable of doing this thing, and here's what she's now doing to direct the team, you'd say, that's a qualified person. If you'd say, the CISO was our auditor and we promoted him to CISO, you'd say, well, that's, as an analyst, you could say, an auditor is not an operating position, a CISO is. I don't think that looks great. Or you say, everyone has responsibility for cybersecurity. You'd say, that certainly doesn't sound like a formal good program. So ultimately, when you're writing these things, you need to be sure that a very good, intelligent analyst who doesn't know cybersecurity will get the trust that Willie was talking about. And we'll just do a couple more, and then we'll jump into a conversation about ISO 27001 and materiality. So please tell investors how management are involved in cybersecurity incident management. That's interesting. So when we see incidents happen, very often a technologist decides that they're going to resolve the whole thing. But an incident has a business impact. Now, there are a lot of incidents, events that happen that just won't ever have a business impact, or it can be very easily contained, very tidily. But we don't want the technicians to make those decisions all the time. We want there to be an escalation process where the right level of management, who has the responsibility for cybersecurity, says, we actually can't tolerate that one. That's something we have to do something about, that they're involved in that process. And then please tell investors whether management reports incidents to investors. And here's where it all comes to a head. How do you know that you're telling investors what they should know, right? So now let's actually talk about ISO 27001 and materiality. So Willie, you can help people understand why everything I just talked about matters.
Well, the most important, or should I say, one of the most important sections of ISO 27001 is really this section 4, where it asks the organization to understand, what are we actually doing? In what kind of context do we operate? And, you know, from my life way back as an auditor, I can tell you that this seems to be a very difficult question for companies to answer. Oh, we are a printing company. Okay. What exactly do you print? Stuff on paper. Okay. What does this include? Well, sometimes it's checks. Sometimes it's SEC filings. Excuse me. What did you just say? Well, I mean, these kind of documents are super critical to protect. It's not an old-fashioned catalog with all kinds of nice pictures and prices in it, right? The stuff this printing company is printing needs to be protected. But if they are not recognizing that, then they are on the wrong path. Let alone they are not able to identify the applicable rules and regulations and expectations from customers and regulators. If they are not able to do that, then they are not able to fulfill the requirements that are coming from those requirements. And the other question is always, do you really, really understand the needs and expectations of interested parties? So let's make a hypothetical example. Not so much hypothetical. Let's say you are a major German car manufacturer. And let's say your network goes down and you are not able to produce in 7 factories for about 24 hours. Hot out of the press, right? What are the implications to interested parties? Who are our interested parties? Of course, the shareholders, yes. The board of directors, yes. The employees, the suppliers, the customers, the dealer network, the banks, and so on and so forth. It's an entire list of things that need to be considered. And many, if not most companies, are not really able to identify even the list of interested parties. On a regular basis, when I audited the HR department, for background check and so on and so forth, who are your interested parties? Well, of course, the employee. Okay, fair enough. Who else? Insurance company? Yep. Keep on talking. They never ever talked about the family of the employees, the dependents of the employees, the people that are on that list that needs to be filed with the insurance company in case of the death and therefore life insurance cashing, or the beneficiary on a health insurance plan. Every company has not just the employee data, but also the dependent data on file. But where can I see that these parties are listed under interested parties? Companies just simply forget that. If they forget that, then they are not able to protect. And that's the fundamental issue. It's this old thing, you cannot manage what you don't know. And it all comes down to simple things like inventory management. But when I say inventory management, people think, what's in the warehouse? Yeah, among that. What's on our network? The inventory of devices. Yep, among others. What else? Well, inventory of data, inventory of intellectual property, inventory of whatever. And only if we know that, we can properly manage. And that's the reason why 27001 is so powerful. It's broad, it's wide, and therefore gives a lot of flexibility. But unfortunately, companies are not willing or able to really see this as an opportunity. They cherry pick one or the other thing that seems to be easy and obvious, but are really missing the boat because of that. And I think that organizations would be really encouraged to have a very close look at ISO 27002, which is guidelines for the interpretation. And yes, familiarize themselves with all kinds of concepts out there to protect information. Chris, you mentioned earlier already CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. In some areas, there should be the 4th letter, which is safety. Think about cybersecurity for vehicles. Right. If a vehicle is hacked, there's the safety of the passenger and the safety of the surrounding affected. And I'm just wondering how many companies that are obligated to follow the SEC rules will also consider cybersecurity of the products they are delivering and manufacturing. because that will have material impact as well.
Yeah. There's a famous case in the U.S. A lot of people point to it, the Ford Pinto case, they call it, where in the 1970s, Ford was producing a car that was unsafe. That they said, but the amount of money it would cost us to put this $1.50 protection into each of our Pintos to prevent explosion, that would actually prevent explosion when there's a fender bender, because these Pintos were exploding with the fender bender. This $1.50 part for all the models that we're manufacturing is more expensive than the value of a statistical life of the people we expect to die in the explosion. Done. And well, wait a minute, hold on. The life actually can be protected. And maybe you need to put that into your risk calculus instead of discarding it, right? To exactly your point. So this is actually the nature of the first conversation that I had with Willie. So we're sitting with a client, they're setting up ISO 27001. One of the first things Willie asks for is the risk register. Can I see your risk register? I want to see, oh, sure. They put it up on the screen. We're in a conference room. And Willie's looking at a few, And we've been working on this risk management program with this client for more than a year. And he says, how do I know these risks are relative to your business and the controls you've selected? How do I know those protect your business? And the client was, security is, well, it's for security. Security is good. And, business, very, very important. Security for business is why that's the reason. And Willie asked a few more probing questions and said, okay, well, let me read this risk. And you read a risk. And then you asked, in particular, how do I know that risk associates with your business context? What is your business context? And the client realized after about a year, and I got a dirty look from my client across the table, why didn't you prepare us for this? And in my mind, I shrugged, but everything worked out because we had 6 weeks now after that stage one to now work on how to state in our risk register what we meant. And what we said was, let's call out each of these requirements as a separate kind of impact. What kind of impact can we cause our customer and our bottom line ability to function and the investor who's getting this organization off to a good start, and reevaluated each of the risks that way, and then came up with new risks. There were non-technical risks about this information security program that we realized, oh, these risks matter, because if someone got a hold of a contract, they would have a good sense of pricing that someone else got, which would drive down our prices, which wouldn't be great for the investor or our objectives as a business. And they started to think in different ways because they started to say, how could I hurt my investor? How could I hurt my customer? How could I hurt my business? Once you think about what the impact is, you're thinking more intelligently about what could go wrong. And then you think, what does this have to do with cybersecurity, and how can cybersecurity programs help reduce that risk? Very enlightening little moment. Yeah.
And I really would like to emphasize, while cybersecurity is obviously very, very important, we cannot ignore information security. And from an ISO perspective, cybersecurity is a subdomain of information security. And my prime example would be, if you really want to find something out about your competitors, go to the airports those guys are flying out from, and just listen to the salespeople's conversations.
Willie, that happened just yesterday. It happened just yesterday. 3 guys talking. And one of them said the crudest thing you could say about their client. They said, this is the gift that keeps on giving. And said the name of the client. Who's my client? Completely different service area. And then I saw them later and said, I was talking, I put up a phone, social engineering. So this is what I do. Willie, this is so right. So I said, oh yeah, but they're all over the airport. I'll bet I could guess. Guys, what line of business are you in? So they thought I'm in a conversation, and they said engineers. And I said, got it, great, engineers. I wasn't talking to anyone on the phone. I just wanted to find out, were these I'm gonna go talk to my clients now and say, hey, there's a team of engineers at the airport who are saying this about you. I think you want to review your contracts. The gift that keeps on giving. What a terrible thing to call your client.
And you know, it's really funny. The best conversations for social engineering you can have sitting in business class. You know, in coach, there are this you know, hobby travelers going to visit grandma. But if you fly quite often, you are lucky in getting an upgrade. You're sitting in business class, and guess who's sitting next to you? And then another guy, another gal who is traveling like crazy for business. And obviously now you start talking, what are you doing? What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. And sooner or later you recognize, well, they might be actually your competitor, or they might be a client or something like that. And that is extremely dangerous. And I think companies neglect to train the most vulnerable employees. And the most vulnerable employees are actually those that are constantly out, not the guys and girls that are sitting in an office. I mean, they can do stupid stuff in terms of opening an attachment to an email. But the guys and girls that are out in the wild at conferences, at clients, at the airport, those are the people that are by their very nature very open, very talkative, very, you know, keen to talk about what they do and what their company is doing. And this is where then the risk hits. And yes, I think that companies really, really need to do a better job in preparing their employees for this kind of situations.
But when they think about information,
parties, right?
And when you think about the risk as information, right? Oh, okay, it's not just in the system. Okay, so a quick humor break. Here are two fun ways that we help people understand why we do these two clauses. Okay, so the first one is what your breach disclosure letter looks like if you do your risk assessment looking at your own internal risk, but not risk associated with third parties. Okay, this is a made-up letter, but this is how it would read if you forgot 4.2 in your risk management program. So we write to inform you that our company experienced an attack on our customer billing systems recently. As a result, your personal and financial data may have been exposed. This letter informs you about the incident. First, we want you to know that we take our profits very seriously. Our information security program protects your data up to the point that costs for securing your data reduces our profits. We take great care to understand how the likelihood and magnitude of breaches may harm our profits, and we use security controls that don't interfere with those profits. Regulators and plaintiffs' attorneys will independently verify that we explicitly accepted the risk that led to this breach, and will take note that our profitability remained intact during the breach, etc. So a breach disclosure announcement that was forgetting, for an organization that forgot 4.2, was only managing to their own personal interest. And that's the kind of breach disclosure you would elicit. Here's another fun way I describe this to people. So risk analysis is about likelihoods, and it's about impacts. Some risk analysis is quantitative. Some risk analysis is qualitative. But cyber risk analysis misses the point if you forget the risks you impose on others. And the idea, again, is that you'll see risk assessment methods out there that people are saying, we're going to focus on evaluating the quantitative issue of your profitability. How could we be harmed with an event? How could we be harmed when we get sued? Instead of, how are we harming other people, which is a critical information and cybersecurity risk question. How could we be harming other people, especially when the information we're trying to protect is someone else's information? If we're taking a risk with someone else's information, guess what we've done? We've exposed them to risk that they didn't know about. And the SEC is starting to say, you have to include other people in your risk management programs now, which is very, very helpful. Okay, so quickly, here's what we wanted to talk about. And this is one of the things that's been really enlightening since working with you, Willie, where you asked that question, how do we know this matters? We standardized the risk analysis after that conversation. And what we did was we mapped this thing out where we'd say, let's look at a risk qualitatively or quantitatively, where risk equals probability times 3 different kinds of impact, or likelihood, if you're doing qualitative, likelihood times 3 different kinds of impact. And what we're going to do is say the three kinds of impact I'm concerned about is my mission, the reason why I exist, the reason why the marketplace trusts me with this risk. My objectives, what I'm trying to do internally to help myself, and my obligations, what I owe others. I owe a duty to my investors, to be honest and open and let them know what's going on with the business, to be truthful, prudent, but truthful. My customers, my employees, if I'm managing insurance, the benefactors and those covered by the plan, I have obligations to protect others. But when I do my risk analysis, if I figure out a clear definition for my mission, my objectives, and my obligations, then every time I evaluate a risk, I can be reminded, oh, it's not just my risk. It's the risk of my mission. Is my mission going to be intact? My objectives are my obligations. And I derive my risk value on the highest of those impact values times the probability or the likelihood. Right. Now, what I'm doing is I'm putting on record that I care about those things, but then something really interesting happens. I can actually do the risk analysis by saying, I'm going to determine whether a risk compared to its safeguard is reasonable. And this is something that's been very interesting that we've been done, Willie, since that conversation with you so many years ago, is we've looked at regulations and statutes, we've looked at lawsuits, and we've been working very tightly with regulators, attorneys, and judges to say, I think we've got an answer to this question, what's reasonable? Because you see reasonable and risk-based in every cybersecurity risk and information security, cybersecurity risk and data breach law. Just look for it. Now you'll start to see reasonable is the standard you have to address. Well, you can take your ISO 27005 risk analysis. If you say, I'm looking at these three different impacts, I'm going to look at that risk according to an observed risk, a risk that I'm looking at now. How am I doing now? What's my risk? And in this case, we're doing a qualitative assessment, and we see we're at 12 out of, say, a 25 range. And then someone says, well, how about if we use this safeguard? What we can do now is say, let me evaluate that safeguard using those same risk criteria. We've all heard about a concern of investing in a safeguard that actually inhibits a part of our business, or may cost so much it'll be an overwhelming harm to our budget, or it creates a risk that we didn't have before by using a technology that, so for example, we've got a client who operates in 2 continents, and they were doing backups, data backups by crossing who's got what data. So if you have a downtime in one continent, you don't have downtime in the other, you can always recover the data. Ransomware can be recovered, all sorts of nice things with this model. But they doubled the amount of information that insiders could get a hold of if there was an insider threat. They introduced a threat that they didn't have before through their safeguard. So it's okay to do that. Yeah.
Did they also consider that transfer from one continent to another continent includes transfer from one jurisdiction to another, and therefore might be not allowed?
Right. You have to think about all this stuff. Exactly right. So someone may have a technical solution and create another risk, right? So you ask yourself, did I create another risk by doing this? And if you did, if the risk is the same or higher, by definition in US law and a lot of Western law, that's not reasonable. And that becomes a really important thing, not just when someone comes up with an idea for a safeguard, but when you're actually applying a control the way it's described in a law or in a standard. One other organization that, Willie, you joined me at looking at, you might recall, this organization was told to have a camera outside their door by their client. Have a camera outside your door to see who comes in and out of this room that had, outside the office was a shared hallway to business office. And they said, we can't, because that camera looks down the office where across the hall from us, there's a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist's office is there. And we would be video recording people who have psychiatry services, which is a HIPAA violation now for that psychiatrist. We're exposing a risk to them. So if you get caught up with this concern that I think the safeguard isn't right, I think it creates a risk, you can actually demonstrate that with your ISO 27005 risk analysis. That's all duty of care risk analysis means. Exactly. That's an interested party.
Includes neighbors.
Yeah, and their patients. And not because you would have thought of that unless you did the risk analysis. Should I put this camera in the hallway in front of a psychiatrist's office? Already that rings a bell, right? Now, what that also allows you to do is say, well, then let me find an alternative control that does fulfill the control objective, even if it isn't the specific control that was asked for, but that poses a lower risk. So if an auditor would come by and say, you were supposed to have a camera in your hallway, you could say, I know, but here's the risk that creates. But if the objective was to be sure I tracked who came in and out of my office, I've got a camera inside my office, that when the door opens, it doesn't see who goes in and out of that psychiatrist's office. So I have a rule different from what you asked for, but it achieves the objectives and it creates a lower risk. That's reasonable. That's all that's something important to think about with legal issues, all right? This is a quick model of what that might look like. So in your ISO 27005 risk analysis, you may have a qualitative scoring system, semi-quantitative we'll call it, where you say, I've got a sense of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable in terms of an impact. The SEC is telling you to think about what's material, so that if you think there's going to be a damage that will be material to an investor, you can state how you would recognize that was occurring. If you've got an objective, emission, on-obligations definition for that line between what's acceptable and not acceptable, you can say, I'm going to use that same definition to determine what's material and what's not material. If I were to release the last names of people who are my employees in a large city, that very likely wouldn't create a kind of impact that puts anyone at any disadvantage. It would very likely not be material at all. If it's their name, their contact information, their something about their personal life, okay, that could be material. That could harm them, which of course then repercusses to the investor. So you're able to say, I've got a clear definition of what would be harmful to me and to others. I'm managing my program that way, and I'm making sure I've got a good distinction between what we would call material and not material as the SEC is defining it. All right? So because this will be on a video that's available later, I'll scoot by, but you can definitely take a look at this on pause if you want. And this is just a list of the states, the US states, who've adopted this very explicit method, saying, look, if I'm using something like ISO 27005 or the CIS risk assessment method to apply these DoCRA principles, duty of care risk analysis, looking at risk to me, looking at risk to others, making sure the burden of my safeguard is not greater than the risk I'm addressing, then that's what we mean by reasonable. So we have about 10 states in one way or another who've adopted that rule set. This is just a list of them who've adopted it over the past few years, all right? I know we have a Q&A session and we're getting close, so why don't I turn over to you?
To you is in Willie or in you as in Cindy?
Well, Willie, we can talk a little bit about the Academy training. I think that
Yes, let's do that.
you have a pretty good involvement in these courses. Willie is one of our instructors for these series of classes that you can see. We have introduction to this standard if you need to learn about that and learn about the details of the requirements. We offer internal auditor training. We can help you understand the difference from the previous to the new versions of this standard. And also there's instruction on 27701 requirements. Willie, what is 27701?
This is an excellent question because a lot of people really don't know it. So let's start with what is 27001. 27001 is the management system for the protection of information. Now, there is a subset of information that requires a lot of additional attention, and this is personally identifiable information. Names, dates of birth, let alone social security numbers, things like that, right? So ISO identified that and said, well, the standard 27001 approach might be not sufficient to protect PII, personally identifiable information, and therefore there is an additional standard that is an extension to 27001, and this is 27701. So an organization really would need to be certified to 27001 in order to get certified to 27701. Of course, that can be done at the same time. So the stage 1, stage 2 audits and subsequent surveillance audits can be done simultaneously in parallel. However, in order to get certified to the PIMS, the Personally Identifiable Management System, the organization needs to have also a 27001 certificate. The interesting thing about 27701 is that it actually does have a mapping to GDPR requirements. Although I need to emphasize, certification to 27701 does not mean certification to GDPR. There's a lot of technicality behind that, and if somebody in the audience is interested in more details, more than happy to discuss. But for the purpose of this webinar, certification to the ISO 27701 does not mean certification to GDPR.
Well, that makes sense. So I did want to mention to the audience, when you receive the copy of the slides, you will be able to link where you see US or Canada, the US site or Canada site for the training academy, and learn more information about those classes, and you can register right at our website. So I have a question. If I am 27001 certified, does that give me legal safe harbor if I have a data breach?
Yeah. So yeah, this question comes up a lot. That's a good one. So the idea we just talked about reasonableness as a standard that regulators are looking for. Some states do say that if you're using an information security management system, and they will explicitly say ISO 27001 is an example, you have what's called an affirmative defense. So it doesn't mean safe harbor, like I was breached, but I got a certificate, so it's okay. You can say, do you see that I was using a reasonable program? And then the regulators or the prosecutors, depending on the state or country, these are just select places that are doing it now. India, Australia, I believe, the state of Connecticut, Ohio, will say you've got the ability to hold that up as a defense even before you get into whether you were ready for the when the breach happened. So it doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. It just gives you a really good defense, and one that the state's obligated to follow. But the principles, I'll tell you, in practicality, regulators don't have the resources to go after people who are well prepared. They go after organizations who are not well prepared. So in a practical sense, you'll be a hard fight to pick if you did have ISO 27001 certification.
All right. We have another question. Does this work with FAIR or other quantitative risk assessment methods?
Yes, so FAIR, so FAIR. So FAIR, we were talking earlier about having a quantitative risk assessment that just looks at profitability. So FAIR and other quantitative risk assessment methods do that. They only look at what's happening to us. You can use FAIR with ISO 27001. It's just that you would need to also do associated risk analysis for these external interested parties. That's hard to do quantitatively, not impossible. So what we do with some clients is say, we can blend a qualitative and quantitative method. Feel free to use things like FAIR. They're very smart in many ways, but they only look at clause 4.1, and that's not sufficient for ISO 27001 or the law, frankly.
All right. Here's another question. How does ISO 27701 relate to the California Consumer Privacy Act and its amendment, the California Privacy Right Act? Does that assist with compliance? Any mapping of the California law and the standard?
So yes, it helps with, but very similar to what Chris earlier said, it's not a guarantee of not being guilty of something. Fundamentally, all those management system standards say it's the organization's responsibility to identify applicable laws and regulations. And if that means the California privacy law, absolutely, that needs to be identified. And yes, there's actually an open source mapping project out there that was originally started by Microsoft, but is open source. It's on GitHub, and it's called the Mapping Project. And it's mapping 27701 requirements to literally every single global privacy standard. or should I say privacy regulation. And now you may say, just hold on, how is it possible to every single one? Well, that's the power of crowdsourcing. That's the power of open source. Because if somebody in whatever country says, hey, my law in my little village is not mapped, you are more than welcome to map it. And people do it. So the mapping project, look out for that on GitHub, is a wonderful tool, wonderful example of open source data mapping or requirements mapping from 27701 to privacy regulations on a global scale.
Very interesting. So is it like Wikipedia, kind of?
Jein. Jein is German for ja and nein at the same time. Yes and no at the same time. So yes, people can contribute. So that means everybody can contribute to the correctness of the mapping, and that because it's peer reviewed, obviously that helps with the quality. So yes, you can be assured that the quality of the mapping is indeed, I wouldn't say perfect, but nearly perfect. I mean, I have a mathematical education under my belt, so perfect would mean 100%, and that's not possible. So 99.999% is not perfect from my point of view, but yeah.
Pretty close. Well, thank you so much, Willie and Chris, for the excellent information. It's been a great session. I think everyone learned a lot. Thank you all for being here. Please remember, we will be sending you a copy of the slides. Excuse me. There we go. You can see everyone's contact information there. It'll be sent to you. There's some SGS on social media. And we will be sending you a survey link upon completion of the session. Please complete the survey, provide your feedback. It helps us to improve these webinars and sessions and learn more about what you want to learn about. Thank you again for attending. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.